3 cherries. That's all it took. The screen flashed jackpot in blinding red, and somewhere inside that private room, a person detonated. Not figuratively. Not a metaphor. Thousands of red-pitted fruits materialized inside a human body all at once, stomach distended, ribs punched outward at wrong angles, torso split open like something had been trying to escape from the inside. I rolled in with the mop bucket, cursed under my breath, and got to work. Because that's the job. That's what you sign up for when you work the floor at a casino with a machine called Slot 333. And the cherries? That wasn't even close to the worst one. Let me back up. The machine appeared without explanation. No delivery. No installation crew. No paperwork. One shift there was a gap between 2 slots on the floor, next shift that gap was full. In a casino that size, the noise, the lights, the constant blur of bodies and liquor and cheap perfume, it went unnoticed longer than it should have. Until a patron was found slumped over the stool in front of it. Dead. My coworker who found them said they'd assumed it was just another slot zombie. One of those regulars with their rituals and superstitions, mashing buttons in a trance. Nothing unusual. Just another body in the chair. The machine itself was small. Old. A screen, a few buttons, and a pull arm on the side. No manufacturer label anywhere on the casing. No keyhole in the back. It had no power cord running to the wall. It had no cord, and it still ran. Above the display, in glowing red letters, life or death. Below that, Slot 333. I remember standing there the first time I saw it, doing the math. 333. Half of 666. Halfway to the devil. The casino floor hummed and flashed around it, and the machine just sat there, dark and quiet, lit up like something that knew exactly what it was. We moved it to a private room after the first incident. Curtained off. Out of sight. Some of the high rollers found their way there eventually. They always did. Mike, they need you in the private room. My manager's voice crackled through the earpiece on a night that had been quiet up until that moment. Do I need the mop? I asked. A pause. Yeah. And put the boots on. I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second. Then I went and got the boots. My debts had me by the throat, and the hazard pay was the only thing keeping my head above water, so I didn't argue. I just grabbed the mop bucket, let the wheels clack against the tile, and pushed through the curtain. 3 cherries on the screen. Jackpot still flashing. The patron was on their knees, head cocked back, mouth frozen open in a scream that had nowhere left to go. From behind I could already see the damage, ribs punched through the skin at angles that made no anatomical sense, a cavity where the torso used to be, cherries still rolling across the tile in slow lazy arcs. It took a full hour just to deal with the fruit. They scattered every time the broom got close, rolling under the machine, into the corners, across the pooling blood. The body was easier. I laid the trash can on its side, worked the patron in head first, wheeled everything out the back door. Armed security in black masks took it from there. I never asked what they did with the bodies. Back on the floor afterward, I spotted her, a woman in a long red wool coat, bleached curls, the posture of someone who'd been at the high-stakes tables all night and something had gone badly wrong. A high roller. I'd seen her before. She was walking straight toward the private room. I should have said something. I didn't. Instead, I slipped into the back kitchen, tipped the cook a few dollars, ordered a burger and fries. I stared at the ketchup and quietly decided against it. I was still wiping grease from my hands when the radio went again. Private room. No boots this time. Just a disposal. I pushed myself out of the chair with the energy of someone twice my age and went back. 3 rubber ducks on the screen. Yellow. Cheerful. Completely incongruous with everything else in that room. On the floor below the machine sat a 3-foot rubber duck wearing a miniature red coat with a crown of curly blonde hair. I looked at it for a moment. I bent down and picked it up. It was heavier than it had any right to be. I had to strain just to straighten my legs, and as I carried it toward the back door I heard liquid shifting inside. A single red tear tracked down from its black plastic eye. I threw it in the dumpster. It hit with a hollow thunk. "Room's clear," I radioed. They turned into a rubber duck. "Strange," Donovan said. "Not enough for me to care. Good work. Can I go home?" "Clock out first." Now I should explain how the machine works, because the cherries and the duck are not the full picture. The combinations are theoretically infinite. I stopped trying to catalog them years ago. But I've seen enough to give you a rough map. On the manageable end, 3 houses, and your mortgage disappears overnight, or a new home materializes in place of wherever you slept the night before. A sock, a watch, a magnifying glass, every object you've ever lost floods back into memory, exact location, exact condition, like someone unlocked a file you didn't know existed. But on the other end, 3 skulls, instant cardiac arrest, heart stopped before the last reel finishes spinning. 3 candles, spontaneous combustion from the inside out, no accelerant required. 3 boulders, I've only seen that one once. The patron was a layer of material across the floor under a single fist-sized rock. I needed the boots for that one. I thought I'd seen every meaningful variation the machine could produce. I was wrong. I came into my next shift and Donovan was waiting outside the private room with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Not the usual flat managerial calm. Something that looked almost like guilt. The mop bucket rolled to a stop. I tightened my grip on the handle and walked in. 2 people on the floor. 3 yin-yangs on the screen. The bile hit my throat before I fully processed what I was seeing. They were arranged in a perfect circle, head to feet, feet to head, and they were alive. Both of them. Conscious. Eating each other. Person 1 had worked through the feet of Person 2 and was somewhere around the midsection. Person 2 had made similar progress in the opposite direction. The sound was structural. Wet. The crunch of a spine being worked through, blood and fluid running across the tile, the smell of metal and something biological and ancient that I won't describe further. I stood there for 4 full seconds before I touched the intercom. Donnie. They're still alive. Yes, Mike. I know. They're eating each other. Yes, Mike. What am I supposed to do? Clean it up. I grabbed Person 1 by the armpits and started dragging. Person 2 followed across the floor, reaching, trailing fluid, trying to continue what the machine had started. Both of them screaming, not just in pain, in frustration at the interruption. I got my hand over person one's mouth and pulled them toward the back door. "Outside," I said into their ear. "You can go back to it when we're outside." The screaming dropped to a whimper. I changed the mop water 4 times. 4 times before the floor was clean enough. My back filed a formal protest. My uniform was soaked through. I radioed Donovan when it was done. Why were there 2 people in the room? A pause longer than it should have been. The higher-ups wanted to see what happened. "Tell them I want double hazard pay. Tell them to cover my therapy." I went out the employee door to the smoking section and lit a cigarette. The casino sealed itself behind me, all that noise and light and manufactured cheer muffled behind a heavy wall, and out here it was just cold air and the sound of the match. I pulled out my phone. I had to tell someone. Not Jane, never Jane. Not anyone whose face I'd have to look at across the dinner table while they wondered what kind of person I'd become. So I'm telling you. If you work at a casino, any casino, and your manager hands you a mop bucket and says to put on the boots, ask very specific questions before you walk through that door. And if you're a regular, if you like the pull of the arm and the spin of the reels, and you ever find yourself in a private room with a curtain and a machine with no cord and no label, glowing life or death above a display that reads slot 333, you can play. Nobody's stopping you. Just know that the house always wins. And on slot 333, winning and losing look almost identical from the outside. I couldn't tell anymore if I was pulling it out, or putting it back. I was crouched on my shower floor at 10 o'clock at night, a wire hanger in my hand, an endless matted tangle of hair coming up from inside the pipe, some of it mine, some of it someone else's. And at some point, the line between the two had dissolved completely. There was something arranged inside it. Not a shape. Not anything I could hold in my mind long enough to describe. Just this feeling, heavy, certain, that it was organized in a way I wasn't supposed to understand. Every time I thought I'd almost figured out how it fit together, the thought slipped away. Like it didn't want to be seen. Like it had been doing this for a long time, and knew exactly how to stay hidden. I stopped. Set down the hanger. And I'm still not sure I should have started in the first place. I moved into my first apartment 3 weeks ago. Downtown location, decent rent, relatively new building. The bathroom was clean, a little cramped, the way first apartments always are, just a sink, a toilet, and a shower stall packed together like an afterthought. One of those small metal grate drains in the floor of the shower, the kind where you can see straight down into the pipe if you look. I didn't think much about it. You don't, when everything is new and you're still figuring out where you put the coffee mugs. My hair is long and dark. Coarse strands that collect in your hand when you wash it if you're paying attention, the kind that will absolutely destroy a drain if you let them go. I'd learned that lesson in the dorms. So I gathered them while I rinsed, and I left the small clump sitting on top of the grate to dry. I'd pick it up in the morning. There was no hair in the morning. I stood there for a moment looking at the empty grate. Then I put on a shower cap, and didn't think about it again. Not yet. A day or two later I washed my hair again, and this time, I paid attention. I left the clump sitting on top of the drain while I stepped out and reached for my towel, deciding I'd pick it up while it was still wet. When I reached down, the strands started moving, sliding through my fingers, strand by strand, like the water was still running. I told myself, sleep deprivation, the stress of moving. I told myself I'd do something about it if it happened again. The next day the drain did nothing. I pushed it to the back of my mind. Friday morning, I noticed the pipe looked longer. Not dramatically, just enough that I couldn't quite see where it curved and disappeared the way I could before. I told myself I was probably misremembering. Who really looks that hard at a drain? Saturday, it was back to normal depth. And sitting at the bottom, just before the curve, was a clump of hair. My hair. More of it than I'd lost that week. More than I could account for. I looked away. I turned the shower on. And while I rinsed the shampoo out and stood there with my eyes closed, I couldn't stop myself from looking down through the water at the grate between my feet. 2 strands coiled down into the pipe, past the empty space where the clump had been, and were gone. I got out. I sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the drain for a long time. There was something about the way it had moved. Slow. Deliberate. Matching my pace exactly, like whatever was below was paying attention. I reached for the next clump carefully, slowly, like someone who didn't want to startle it. Something from underneath began to pull it down through the slats at the same speed I was moving. Patient. Unhurried. Until the last strand disappeared. I stood up. Got dressed. Went to work. And I started to look forward to it. That's the part that's hardest to explain. The checking became a ritual. Every morning before work, crouching down over the grate, seeing what had been left. Some days there was nothing. Some days there was a clump, always mostly mine, always damp and slightly slimy with conditioner residue, always that familiar coarse texture when I rolled the strands between my fingers. Whatever had been left for me was free for the taking. That much felt clear. But anything I hadn't picked up, anything that had slipped through during the shower itself, that belonged to the drain. The rules felt almost generous. Midweek I found 2 blonde hairs twisted through one of the clumps. Longer than mine. Someone else's. A few days later, something solid glinted in the light as I sorted through the tangle. A small silver earring. One of those tiny hoops people leave in when their piercings are still new, so the holes don't close overnight. It wasn't mine. I held it in my palm for a long time. And the pipe, through all of this, kept getting longer. Some mornings I'd look down and the curve was exactly where it should be. Other mornings the flashlight on my phone couldn't find it. I started to stop looking. Not out of fear, exactly. More like some part of me understood that measuring it was beside the point. Wednesday broke the pattern. I crouched over the grate the way I always did, fingers moving toward the clump slowly, giving it time to respond. Nothing happened. That's okay, I thought. Sometimes it takes a minute. I waited. I toyed with the strands. I shifted my weight and tried again. Still nothing. I stood up and went to work with a strange tightness in my chest that I didn't fully examine until later. When I got home that evening, the clump was still there, unchanged, and I picked it up with no resistance and dropped it in the trash. The pipe didn't move at all while I showered. Thursday I stayed home and found another clump in the morning. I didn't pick it up. I left for errands, came back a few hours later. It was gone. No game. No waiting. Just gone, while I wasn't there to see it. I sat at my desk all day with this low, restless frustration I couldn't explain to anyone. It had broken the pattern. It had changed the rules without telling me. And I couldn't figure out what I'd done wrong, or whether I'd done anything at all, whether there even was a logic to it that I was supposed to understand. By 9 or 10 that evening I couldn't sit still anymore. I got a screwdriver and a wire hanger from the dry cleaning bag by the door. The grate came off easy, 2 screws, almost no resistance, like it had been waiting to be opened. I bent the hanger into a hook and started pulling. There was so much hair. It came up in thick, matted ropes, mine woven through with other people's, different textures, different lengths, impossible to tell where one person ended and another began. I kept pulling. More and more, pulling on the shower floor around my knees, and still more coming, something always wedged deeper in. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, I started to notice something. Not a shape. Not anything I could name or hold on to. Just this feeling, growing heavier the longer I looked, that it was arranged. That everything I was pulling up had been organized in a way that had meaning, a logic that existed completely outside anything I had words for. I kept almost seeing it. The way it was supposed to fit together kept surfacing at the edge of my mind and then dissolving the second I turned toward it. Like it would let me get close, but not quite there. And then I realized, I couldn't tell anymore if I was pulling it out or pushing it back. My hands were still moving. The hair was still moving. But the direction had become unclear somewhere in the last few minutes, and I hadn't noticed when. I stopped. Set the hanger down on the edge of the tub. Sat back on my heels and looked at the open drain and the wet tangle on the floor around me. I don't think the drain is broken. I don't think there's a clog, or a structural problem, or anything a plumber would recognize if I called one. I think there's something down there that's been patient for a very long time. That has a system. That leaves things out for me like an offering, and takes what it wants in return, and somewhere in the last 3 weeks, I stopped finding that strange. I stopped finding it strange. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the hair, not the earring, not the pipe that stretches further than it should. The fact that I looked forward to it. The fact that when it went quiet I felt like I'd done something wrong. The fact that I spent a Thursday picking through the logic of a drain like it was a relationship I was trying to repair. I'm not sure what I was hoping to find at the bottom. I don't know if I was supposed to find anything. But I set the hanger down, and I left the grate off, and I went to bed. And this morning, the shower floor was clean. All of it, gone. Like none of it had ever been there. I stood in the doorway for a long time looking at the open drain in the floor. And I felt, for the first time in 3 weeks, genuinely afraid. Not of what's in the pipe. Of how long it took me to get here.